It is my great pleasure to introduce to the microphone my friend and our friend, Congressman David Jolly.
Hey, thank you, folks. Thank you for being here. Dr. Law referred to the special election campaign. I realized this morning when I arrived, the last time I was on this stage was for a debate during that campaign. And the most news we created that night is that I wore brown shoes with a blue suit. Some of you may remember that. So this morning, I put on black shoes to avoid that controversy once and for all. I appreciate you being here. Listen, this is intended to be exactly what we call it, an ideas conference, but hopefully something that our community owns for many years to come. This has been something that I've been interested in. I have done something similar on behalf of our manufacturing and defense industry here locally, but I really wanted to bring together a nonpartisan group of individuals, thought leaders, if you will, and very importantly, pair national thought leaders with our local thought leaders to highlight the talent, the intellectual leadership that we have right here in Pinellas County. Shortly after the election, there was a lot of organizing that had to be done, and so we were going a million different ways. And J.D. White, our Chief of Staff, Preston Rudy, our Communications Director, I kept mentioning, hey, I really want to do this ideas conference. I really want to do this ideas conference. Well, there were only so many hours in the day, and so we just weren't getting traction behind it. So Curtis Kruger with the Tampa Bay Times called me one day and he said, hey, I'm working on a story. Is there anything you can share with me, any news that you might have? I said, sure, Curtis. I'm going to host a new ideas conference at St. Petersburg College. The next day, JD came in, he said, can we talk about this before you advertise it? Listen, I do appreciate you being here. I'm going to go over a couple of the ground rules today. This is really intended to be collaborative, constructive. Some of you, I will give you one last warning. Some of you that I know personally may hear that my voice is a little different this morning. I'm not working on a Johnny Cash impersonation, I promise you. It's just been travel related, and so you might have a backup in the afternoon in Preston Rudy, our communications director. But true story, we were due to fly back from DC yesterday at 1 o'clock. The flight ended up taking off about 6 o'clock. And very kindly of them, instead of landing in Tampa, they landed us in Tallahassee about 8:30 or 9. Told us the airport was closed and a Greyhound bus would be there shortly to pick us up. So we got in the wee hours of the morning in a very different way than we had initially planned. But I'm excited to start this morning. Let me tell you a couple things about today. Some of you saw question cards when you registered. We don't really have strict ground rules, but let me tell you that the spirit of how today's intended. Today's intended to focus on policy in four very key areas: education, the federal budget, energy, and transportation. I would ask that your questions really focus on policy, not on politics. And I'll tell you the questions are being screened, so really I would encourage you, focus on policy, not on the actors behind the policy, and I think that will be very healthy for us. Similarly, in that vein, and one of the ground rules that when Dr. Oliver and I met about this is not intended to be anything at all to do with my positions, my voting record, anything that I do in Congress or on the campaign trail. In fact, all of that is off the table for purposes of today's conference. So any questions related to that, none of the questions need to be directed to me. That's part of the principle of keeping this non-political and focused strictly on policy. So I would ask that be respected as well. My role, if you will, is really that as a moderator. If anything that comes out of my mouth today doesn't end with a question mark, then I've failed in doing my job. My job today is to really moderate the discussion. One last thing on questions. If you do have a question for a specific panelist, if you would note that on the handwritten card. So a couple ways we're going to submit questions today before I introduce the first panel. There are the note cards that were available if you submitted those. And then for those of you with smartphones, as you see on the screen, you can text a question to that 813 area code phone number up there, or you can email them to the New Ideas email at Gmail. any one of those ways, and you can submit those at any time. Those will be constantly being screened in the back of the room, and they'll be brought up here. We have about an hour or so with each panel, so there should be plenty of time to ask questions. And I would really encourage you, please, this is intended to be an engaged day for the entire group. The last thing I will tell you is there will be a poll at the end of each panel. There will be a poll on one very specific question. I'll give instructions for that a little bit later because I don't want to complicate what we're doing right now on submitting questions. But towards the end of this first panel, we'll get you set up. It'll be a smartphone poll where you just text to a specific number and you can participate in the poll. With that, let me bring up our first panel, the education panel, if you will. If you all can make your way up here, what I intend to do with each one of these panels is really just set up a little bit of the context for where we are in the policy world, very, very briefly, and then introduce the panel. The panel will make their opening remarks for as long as they wish, and then we'll engage in a Q&A. The first panel is specifically focused on education. And there are a few more important topics, clearly, than how we as a society provide educational opportunities for our children, our youth, and frankly, in some cases, our adults. And if you consider the complexity of early education, of K through 12 education, consider the competing models, if you will, that for the most part, education is community funded through property taxes, community based. And yet we do have the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which primarily through Title I provides federal investment into our local schools. And in so doing, ties policy requirements to the flow of those dollars. Now, ESEA was enacted in 1965. And then we saw a pretty dramatic reform around 2001 with No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind tried to institute accountability standards to those Title I dollars primarily, but as well as other funding mechanisms. And that set off what has been probably 15 years of a growing conversation, is a generous word, I think we could use it, growing conversation about accountability standards. Many of them state-based. But you saw in the current administration a bit of a relaxing from some of those accountability standards with what they called a flexibility package that granted waivers to certain states. 37 states right now have applied for and received waivers from the administration for some of the accountability standards. Now, they're not just clear waivers. Those waivers require certain standards as well. And the administration also set up then what they call Race to the Top grant funding, which Race to the Top grant funding did have very specific requirements to the funding. And that injected a little bit more conversation, if you will, into the national debate over control of federal dollars to influence local education. And in fact, so much so that Congress in December, the end of the year budget bill, restricted any funding for Race to the Top because of some of the controversy and conversation regarding whether or not federal funds can strictly be tied to standards and accountability from Washington. All of that in a context of one other very important issue that has been going on for decades, the question of how and whether we invest in and allow for charter schools and vouchers. And that is a question also of great interest for people on both sides of the issue. But that is the context in which we currently have our education system set up, one that is locally funded but heavily invested in from Washington. Money flows through states, accountability standards are set up, and the lingering question remains, and we will see this in the 2016 race. How much control out of either Washington or Tallahassee should we have over our local schools and the performance of our schools and our teachers? So with that, I am pleased to introduce three very distinguished panelists that we have this morning. Dr. Michael Grego is Superintendent of Pinellas County Schools with more than 30 years of experience as a classroom teacher. Dr. Grego holds 2 master's degrees and a doctorate degree in educational leadership. Please welcome Dr. Michael Grego. Let me also introduce State Senator John Legg. He is chair of the Florida Senate Pre-K through 12 Committee. Born in Brooksville, Senator Legg was first elected to the Florida House in 2004. A Florida certified classroom teacher with more than 10 years of classroom experience. Senator Legg holds both a bachelor and master's degree from University of South Florida. Please welcome Senator John Legg. And finally, we have Ms. Tinette Salazar, who arrived via Atlanta from Colorado last evening, a National State Relations Director for the Education Commission of the States. Ms. Salazar founded Salazar & Associates, an independent lobbying and political consulting firm focused on K-12 education and higher education issues. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a law degree from the University of Colorado. Please welcome Ms. Tinette Salazar. And with that, Dr. Grego, I will give the microphone to you for your opening comments, and we will just go down the line.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Congressman Jolly, for having this event and moderating it. And let me take off perhaps where you started, and the importance of policy as it centers around No Child Left Behind. It's certainly a piece of federal legislation that many of us, myself included, embrace because it has a high degree of accountability. It was, I think, a wonderful bipartisan approach to education. And the issues that center locally, what was happening was that there was a disconnect between the federal No Child Left Behind and what was happening state by state, in our case, in the state of Florida. So and the short of it is that we had schools that were being rated by our state accountability system as A's and B's schools, but yet on the federal accountability system we're in corrective action. So this whole issue of reauthorization, I encourage us all to be a part of that, including the educational community and Congress. And so that it was, I think, due to be reauthorized in 2007, and I understand there's work to be still done with this, but we all know that in terms of accountability from the federal to state, my comment would be, let's create a system that is consistent both on the federal and allowing enough flexibility, and that's what the waivers attempted to do. Florida was one of the very first states that issued a waiver, so to speak, and the federal government was approved, I think, in February or March of 2012. So we've been living under this waiver. In fact, the waiver's up to be resubmitted for that. So I think that's an area that our state senators and representatives have to deal with also, because they're also doing a great job in the accountability system in the local level. And wanting it to be consistent with the federal accountability system, so we don't have this disconnect between the two. The other I want to truly praise is the importance of community colleges, state colleges such as St. Pete College, and the importance of Carl Perkins federal funds. Not everyone's going to a four-year university, and it's important. It's the backbone of our economy. It's the backbone of the workforce development issues across this nation, and certainly in Pinellas County. And with that, the federal Perkins dollars, they've gone to such extent. In Pinellas County alone, last year we had over 5,000 high school industry certifications awarded. That is, students who studied a skill, studied a trade, and took and successfully completed an industry certification, which meant employment or meant post-secondary education, some level of post-secondary education, a 2-year AS degree program, an AA degree program, perhaps a university, a technical college, technical schools. So the Perkins, the federal Perkins dollars, I never want to have that overshadowed, but it goes to pay for lab equipment, it goes to pay for teacher training, it goes to pay for internships, supporting apprenticeships, and these truly are the backbone of some of what I think is strongest educational policy decisions that could be made. I want to also express the benefit of Title I funds from the federal government and the impact that it has had locally in Pinellas County. Our ability to expand a very restricted day. You know, in education, time is the constant. It's 5.5 hours of instruction. So more and more things are being put into it. So from a policy perspective, we need to continually look at, and the Title I funds for us has successfully accomplished that. We've expanded our school day. We've expanded the after-school program, before-school program. We have over 12,000 students who need continued education to reduce the achievement gap in our school district, taking what we call a summer bridge program. So the regression of summer learning is eliminated or at least reduced tremendously, especially from our high-poverty communities and neighborhoods. So the Title I programs, I think it's important as we look at federal dollars, federal initiatives, what does it really mean and how is it delivered on the local school district level and the impact that it's having? And I can say to all of you that it's having a tremendous impact. To try to nip the digital divide, we have placed over 6,000 laptops in students of high poverty neighborhoods. So what has this done? We've partnered with our friends at Bright House, and we've created this internet connectivity that we have learning taking place after school. We have learning taking place on weekends. We have learning taking place with siblings. We have learning taking place with our English language learners, because time is sometimes not their friend. It rather needs to add additional learning time. So all of these things are being afforded through such things as Title I funds. And I would be remiss if I didn't speak a little bit about our students with disabilities and the assistance that we receive through our IDEA federal funds and bringing those services that our students, some of our most fragile students in this community, to the forefront, to engage them in educational services, to make them independent workers, independent livers in terms of this society. And those are the things that are truly driving what I say both consistently on the federal and on the local level. Also want to compliment the E-rate program. I am proud to state that every single school in Pinellas County is connected, both wirelessly and hardwire. We're connected. We're bringing instructional technology to the forefront. We're using it. We're engaging our teachers. And I can say without any hesitation that without the E-rate program, this would not have been possible to the extent and to the speed that we're doing it in Pinellas County. We're also one of 6 school districts in the nation that are focusing in on personalized learning through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We were selected as one of those school districts that will seriously look at how to personalize educational services to students. We have a virtual educational platform in our school district called Pinellas Virtual Education. We were recognized as the top out of well over 100 of the largest school districts in the nation, number 17 or 19, I can't really remember, but I know it was in the top 10 or 15% of school districts offering a choice program to parents. And I believe in those opportunities of choice. I believe in competing and to bring the policies to the forefront where parents and others have a quality educational service delivery system with that. So we look forward to our work with the Gates Foundation. We also look forward to, more importantly, the success that we'll have with providing educational delivery, an educational delivery model that might be a little bit off the beaten path than traditional educational system to address and really attack the needs of students, so no student truly goes without graduation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Grego. Senator Legg.
Thank you, and thank you, Congressman, for hosting us. I can't tell you how great it is to have conversations, especially about education, because to me that is the currency that will drive our country forward. And thank you, Dr. Law, and thank you for calling me a friend in the halfway part of session. Well, you didn't hear him say in the back of his mind, with friends like him, who needs enemies, in the middle of session. No, but thank you for really being a friend. And as we are in the mid part of our session, so the stress is high, and we're looking forward. But to kind of dovetail off Dr. Greco, I want to kind of look a little forward a little bit and break it into three silos. And it kind of really frames how I look at education, and I call it the 3 C's. My wife said it should be the 3 A's, but they don't start with A, they start with C, so I couldn't say that. But the 3 C's really are content, creativity, and customization. And really that's where education is you have to have content. It is a fundamental building block of our children and our kids. And that content has to be rigorous, and it has to be high. And we have to expect our children to meet that, because that content is really the information currency that will drive them forward. And what you see is you see states, you see Florida, you see other states moving forward to realizing that we want to ensure that our content, it matches the needs for our information economy and our global economy that's out here. And we want to ensure that, and as we look at the content, we want to ensure that we keep it at that high level. The next issue is creativity. And Dr. Tony Wagner at Harvard University has a great book called Creative Innovators, which is an outstanding book. I don't subscribe to every piece of it, but it really outlines that the people that move our world forward aren't just those who have the content, but they know how to manipulate that content and how to be creative with that content. And what's very interesting is you see all these authors writing a formula of how to be creative, which by definition is not creative. And how do you create creativity? That is the real question that I struggle with, many of us struggle with, that we're struggling with in Florida, is how do we create that environment to create for Dr. Greco now that high content, but allow that flexibility to be creative in the classroom, to create that collaboration among teachers, to create that collaboration among students, to allow that creativity to take place to solve problems, but allow that content to be there, to have the skills to utilize for that creativity. And the last one is customization. We demand customization every aspect of our lives. But yet, when you look back at if you look kind of through the traditional mindset of education, you think of a brick and mortar school that goes K through 6, or K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12. That's what education looks like. But as you see it's evolving, and it's evolving at a breakneck speed in a bipartisan way, where it's looking at those institutionalized brick and mortar K through 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12 are really disappearing and changing in their form. And this is not to say public education is changing. It's that form. You now have schools, you have partnerships, such as right here, which I believe is a model, where you have dual enrollment programs, collegiate high schools, where kids that are graduating with an associate's degree before they graduate with a high school diploma. Why? Because it's a unique program. That is not a K-12 program. It's a 9 through 12 program. It's a partnership with the college here, or the collegiate programs. You also have other programs that look at the MOOCs, massive online communities that look at online learning. And personally, I think online is great. I don't think it's the answer, but it does allow for flexibility for certain individuals that may need it. I look at my son. My son now is 6 years old, doing pre-algebra that he doesn't realize is pre-algebra, called Dragon Box, with a game isolating the dragon, which is an X on one side of an equation, on his iPad in our car, connected online to his teacher as we drive to Tallahassee every week. Why? Because that customization is there for him, because he is different than maybe the sibling. His life is different. The life that we live is different than maybe some of his friends. So his life demands customization. As we move forward in this new ideas, what we see is we see this demand from, not from the institutions, but from people. I was taught many, many years ago by a pastor when I was real little, and he was talking about religious issues, but I apply it to education. He said, keep the main thing the main thing. And that main thing is what's best for kids. Not what's best for institutions, what's best for the system, but what's best for that student, that individual student. And you look at it, and I think Dr. Greco said it best. 5 years ago in Florida, we had about 160 industry certifications. Today, we have over 200,000 industry certifications going on at last count. There is a school in Pasco County right now where 90% of every middle schooler has an industry certification in Microsoft, an employable skill in middle school that they can go out and get a job in middle school. Imagine how prepared they will be for high school. And what we have going on in high schools, is industry certifications that match the economy. As Dr. Greco said, not every child is destined for college. I couldn't agree with that statement more. But I would also add a corollary. Every child is destined for higher education in some form. Whether that is post-secondary, whether it's industry certification, whether it's job training, whether it's some sort of additional training, there is that need, and those skills are required. And if I would leave with one thing, is that this concept of digital classrooms is evolving at a speed that I can't, by the time I say the words, it has changed in a teacher's classroom right now, because they are the creative innovators. They are changing what that looks like, whether it's flipping the classroom, whether it's integrating the technology into their schools. I can't show you what it looks like because they are the creators. It is like a work of art that they are integrating in their classrooms. But what is fascinating is that it's evolving so quickly that if you look at the educators who are now teaching, you do have a generational or a digital divide, not with our students, but with our educators. Those that are coming out of our colleges of ed now are more accustomed to this digital world than those that may have been in the classrooms for years. Not to say those that have been in the classroom for years aren't prepared. It just has evolved so quickly, and that our students are ahead of our teachers. And so we as a state, we as a community, have a challenge to help our educators to keep up with our students. And so if I could leave with one thing, is as we support, let's look at how with these new ideas of content, creativity, and customization, and I always throw in 2 more C's, I was told not to, but of collaboration and character matters in our educational system.
Thank you, Sarah Legg. Ms. Salazar.
Thank you, Congressman Jolly, for the opportunity to come today. I'm with the Education Commission of the states, and we serve states. We help states with their education policy goals that are set at your state level. We were created in 1965, and you can think of us as the Google that didn't exist at that time. We get a lot of questions from governor's office, legislatures, commissioners of education and higher education, superintendents, and teachers, asking us, what do other states do in this particular arena? We are known for our 50-state databases. They're not sexy, they're not exciting, but they can give you an idea of what other states are doing. And what we're noticing is that there is a transformation in education happening, as has been described on the local level and the state level. The transformation that's happening across the country is in standards, assessments, accountability, delivery models, and everything in between that you can imagine. But change isn't always easy, and change is difficult if you don't understand the environment or the direction in which you're going. As we transform into an expanded system that allows for diverse learning environments, where students can move seamlessly across different kinds of learning experiences, we also have to look at our expectations and the accountability measures that go along with those systems. As changes occur, there will be trial and error. We will find systems that work, systems that don't work, and we will learn from each other in order to improve the education delivery models that our students will experience, and maybe we haven't even created yet. Some of the methods that have been discussed earlier today, I'll briefly touch upon. As you know, charter schools have been around since 1991, when states first took that step. Believe it or not, we still have states who do not have any charter legislation on their books and do not allow them. Florida was one of the pioneers in that area, and a lot of the metrics that we recommend to states if they're going to embark on charter school laws have already been successfully passed in Florida, largely thanks to Senator Legg and a lot of his efforts. But it's similar in any system. When you're looking at accountability and standards, what are your expectations and which students are best served by those models? As states across the country debate their current standards and their expectations for what their students can and should do, that link to college and career readiness is important. Some states feel like there's a strict divide between college and career. Other states feel they're one and the same. Everyone at one point in their career will have a job. Therefore, what is the preparation that is required? Whether it's high school, military, some sort of certificate and job training, 2-year, 4-year, or graduate degree. What does that system look like, and what does each student need to do in order to attain their individual goals? I understand Florida has recently revised your standards. You're doing revisions to your assessments currently, and everyone across the country is having the debate, how much time do we need to spend on tests? A lot of that is driven by federal requirements, but we have state requirements as well as local district requirements that contribute to all of that time on assessments. When you add additional end-of-course assessments, college and career assessments, and anything in between, you can see why the amount of time on testing is under the microscope currently. As we look at accountability measures, they vary. What do parents want to know? What do educators want to know? And those are not always the same. We did a 50-state database and a project where we did focus groups of researchers, educators, and parents, and the metrics were very different across the board. But we did find that there were 5 essential indicators that everyone wanted to know. What is the student achievement at that individual school? What is the academic growth taking place with those students? What are the achievement gaps? What are the graduation rates? And what are the measures for college and career readiness? I can say Florida does have all 5 of those indicators in the report card, but something to aspire to. All of the researchers, parents, and educators picked Illinois and Ohio as the top 5 report cards, or top 2 report cards to model after. So I could talk forever about a bunch of different things, but instead I'd like to defer to some questions and see what else we can do to contribute to the conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Salazar. Again, feel free to submit the questions. I don't know if the number will end up back up on the screen. JD has some questions. Let me ask, and again, in the spirit of today is intended to be very constructive. Let me ask your opinion on, because I think we're going to see some diversity here. What is the appropriate role of the federal government? So in 2 areas, I guess I would raise the question. First, on the financing side, because I imagine, as you mentioned, the importance of Title I funding. So the question would be, is there efficiency in having taxpayer dollars flow up to Washington and back to the states, or is there inefficiency in there? And then in the conversation of accountability, do you have an opinion on where and at what level the accountability standards are best established? All the way down from the classroom being one level up to, in the case of Race to the Top, the federal government. But perhaps if you could discuss the advantages, disadvantages of the role the federal government plays both on the finance side as well as the accountability side, and I would ask that of each of the panelists.
Not to be too general.
Dr. Grego, whose schools are funded by Title I, right?
You know, when you look at the total budget, some might say, well, the federal aspect of the slice of the pie is not all that great, but it's probably, I would say, it's some of the most meaningful dollars spent. And my response to that would be, from a philosophical point of view, is that where there's a national interest, there should be national attention to it. So where there's national interest in fighting and establishing the approach of poverty when it comes to Title I funds, because it is clear that some of our most underutilized inner city schools or places where students need the greatest help are those centered around some of the social aspects of not only poverty but every other aspect that comes along with poverty, drug abuse, crime and unemployment, underemployment, and so forth. So, I see that as a national interest. I see the workforce aspect of Carl Perkins as a national interest. I see that the work with students with disabilities, some of our most fragile students, is a national interest. And so to that I would say, yes, I believe the federal government should be involved in terms of that, and should hold states to a high standard for the results of those funds. I think they should come with high levels of accountability with that. Do I believe they should be involved in every aspect of local education? Obviously not, but I think that would be my litmus test, so to speak, to respond to in terms of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was started with the nation at risk and pushing aspects of quality across this country, and it was held at a 30,000-foot level, which then charged states with creating school accountability systems at the state level, which I think that's where it's most meaningful, honestly, is that people like Senator Legg and others who labor with us collectively, and some of the most influential folks and things are right here day by day, working with kids, working with parents, all wanting to see schools across this state and across this nation get better. I do, and I have applauded the fact of trying to make some sort of level of comparison, and I think that's where the start came from, the Common Core and state assessments, national assessments, and I think there's some benefit to that, but there's also another side of every coin, and so I still think we ought to continue to seek after trying to improve the entire nation's educational system. Does it require that we over-test and test in every aspect, every grade, every level, no is the answer to that. But I do think we ought to reflect on it the same way that the governors got together and created a national graduation rate so we can begin to compare good best practices across this nation and try to help everyone rise the tide, so to speak. So where there's collaboration, I love the C word of that, and we can keep the politics out of the educational system. I believe so much can be accomplished and has been accomplished. We just need to continue on that road.
Senator Legg, let me ask you a follow-up to that, because Dr. Grego makes a point which is correct, that there are certain communities where the resources simply aren't there to support the schools. And so in Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that money flows to Washington, Title I, then provides it back to these areas. It collects the greater resources, if you will, to invest from a national perspective in schools that otherwise don't have the resources to support themselves. Given where you sit, is there an ability for states to actually serve in that capacity? So the money would flow, in this case, to Tallahassee, for Tallahassee to then invest in schools throughout the state that perhaps don't have the organic resources.
Well, as in Florida, I think, in Florida, we make mistakes, we make a lot of them, but I think the one area that we do well is Florida has a fairly tried, tested, court-tested funding formula model. And the way that we have an equalization model where you don't have rich counties and poor counties, the money is the same for every student. So whether you're in a poor county or a rich county, you get roughly the same amount of dollars per student. Whereas there was a report, I believe it was by the New York Times or Washington Post a few days ago, where you have, in other states, you have this great divergence of rich counties and poor counties. Huge swings where you have 400% to 500% more per student funding in one county neighboring the next. In our communities, that's not so much as it comes to the operational dollars. But to answer your question, there is some things that we can do better. In the one thing that our partners at in Washington, what I think is helpful is targeting those dollars. And I look at the E-rate as an example. We have while Pinellas is ahead of the curve in wiring our schools for technology, many of our schools are not there. especially our rural districts, and how we can leverage at a state level, to get to your question, leverage at a state level our state dollars through our digital classroom dollars with our federal partners to go in and target those poor districts in the capital funds to help wire those schools, to build that infrastructure capacity. That's where I think we can partner with, and we can make best use of our dollars. But the one thing I would throw out as a caveat, which again we will have a divergence of opinion, what I would ask our friends in Washington is to give us a deadline and give us a goal, and then cut our money off at some point. Because what we don't want is, we don't want to be dependent on the federal government forever for a project. Give us a goal, have us meet that goal, then retarget those funds for a new goal that we could use to meet. You know, one of the things that I see is we have assistance, but what are we being assisted to do? To what end? How do we know when we met that goal? And that would be the one thing at a state level that we would look is, what is that benchmark, and then celebrate when we achieve it, and then reallocate those dollars to a new goal.
So you're chairman of the K through 12 committee. Do you have frustrations at times by the standards or expectations that are set by Washington over local schools?
You do. I mean, you know, it is. We all have different expectations, and you know, like many things, sometimes we think whenever you have a national model, one size doesn't fit all.
Sure.
And the needs of Florida, and I'm sure Dr. Greco would say that Pinellas needs are different than the needs of the rest of the state, just like Florida's needs are different than the rest of the country. They're well-intended goals, but they don't account for the local uniqueness of a state that is as diverse and as large and as unique as Florida.
Right. And you know, I think academically, that's the tension, right? Anytime money flows higher up to then try to receive it back in Florida, there's more people involved and they're further removed. And I think that's obviously on the finance side as well as the accountability side where some of the conversation we're engaged in currently comes in. Ms. Salazar, do you have a comment on that? If not, I've got another question that I'm going to direct straight to you.
I will briefly comment on IDEA.
Okay.
I think originally when the federal government passed that legislation, the intent was to provide 40% of PPR, not expenditures, but PPR. And I think the fact that that goal has not been reached yet creates a greater burden on the school districts as far as their ability to be able to fund the services for those students as well as the other services they're trying to provide. So that is one area where perhaps the federal government could revisit, and I know it's been discussed, but it's an area that we hear quite frequently from districts, considering the range to serve those fragile students ranges from $1,500 to as high as $300,000. And that's a budget breaker in many of the smaller districts and even the larger districts to absorb.
Dr. Greco, do you have a perspective
Great
on that?
statement. No, I don't have.
You concur?
I concur. I'll leave it at that.
All right.
That's a great statement.
Question from the audience, and Ms. Salazar, I'll start with you. Can student and school standards be used to effectively gauge teacher performance? And I wasn't aware that my cousin was here today, but this is a question she asks every day as a teacher in a Title I school. And I will share a little bit of her personal experience. In her classroom, she's not sure from day to day if the student's going to show up, if they have had breakfast, if they have had their medications. There are challenges with student readiness. And so it is an interesting question when it comes to standards from the audience. Can student and school standards be used effectively to gauge teacher qualifications or teacher performance?
And that's a debate that's occurring nationally, and what level should be contributed to judge a teacher's performance. And as you mentioned, we can't cure poverty alone through a single teacher. And not knowing where a child's sleeping that night, if they're going to have lunch or dinner the next morning, if their parents are going to come home, adds to the difficulties of a learning environment. And each student starts at a different place. And so the debate that's occurring across the country right now is how much of a teacher's performance should be evaluated through assessments, through portfolio work, and through other work. If I had the magic answer to that question, I would be a millionaire and not here probably, but I don't have that answer to the question. But it is a debate that we're seeing. It's a debate that we're seeing in the pushback on the use of assessments, on the types of assessments, on the percentages that contribute to that. And I think that is a debate that is still currently taking place with many of the issues that you've raised on the table right now.
Okay. Thoughts, Dr. Grego, Senator Legg?
And this is kind of the crux of the debate that we're having in Tallahassee right now. There is a role for students. There is a role for that in teacher evaluation. The question is, and this is part of the debate, and there'll be a divergence of opinion, is at what level is that role? What other factors are included in there? Should student performance be eliminated from the evaluation? I think that's a draconian step to say that student performance has no effect on a teacher evaluation. But it is just as wrong to say it is the only thing that factors. And I would even say it would be just wrong to say should be a majority of the things that factor. What we're looking at Tallahassee right now is significantly scaling back the percentage of the student performance as it relates to the teacher evaluation. But we're not looking at eliminating it. We're not looking at zeroing it out. There's a recognition that other factors do occur. Peer observations, is that a role? Is principle of observation? Is it inputs? Is it outputs? And it's the balancing act and what goes into that formula that I think is the challenge. But to get to your question, and as said earlier, that is part of the debate. But where we are in Florida is we are going away from it being the preponderance of the part of the teacher's evaluation to being just a component of the teacher's evaluation.
Dr. Grego?
I could speak for too long of a period of time on this. I'd love to meet your cousin. I believe that this is one, and I've had the opportunity to speak in front and testify with Senator Legg's committee and on this very issue, and so I am pretty opinionated on it because I've seen the profession come almost 360 degrees, and I would have to state that student performance should have always been a part of teacher evaluation. I look at Race to the Top as having been the pendulum that swung way too far on this issue, where the state of Florida issued that 50% of a teacher's evaluation should be based on student performance, where no one today could answer why the 50%. No one today could say, where did we get that figure from? Were we just being competitive to try to win that Race to the Top proposal? Or what drove that? What was the research behind that? So I applaud our leaders at the state and Senator Legg for reducing that to 30%, or at least suggesting to be reduced to 30%. But I also would state that a strong state accountability system will drive an effective teacher evaluation system at the local level. In other words, as superintendent of schools, I will make sure, and anyone worth their salt would make sure that student performance is part of teacher evaluation. I think it's become, to your question prior to that, to what level should that sit at? I believe that, again, with a strong state accountability system, that drives an effective teacher evaluation system at the local level. I could not survive. We could not survive without strong evaluation systems based on professional development, based on student achievement outcomes, based on a strong state accountability system. I believe that the Race to the Top has taken us, and that pendulum needs to swing more towards the middle on this issue. And when it does, we'll settle someplace. Like anything else, as was mentioned before, it's gone too far, and it's coming back. I think local districts have to begin to prove and to show that we always have, we should, and we continue to do a better job in this aspect of teacher evaluation. And it's going to sustain itself if it's done right at the local level.
As superintendent of schools, why do you need state standards? Why is the local school district not capable of establishing standards where you measure the metrics of your teachers? Is it the comparative analysis between districts that's important?
Let me qualify the question.
Sure.
In terms of comparing or evaluating teachers, or for the state standards?
Well, I think you mentioned correct me if I'm wrong, you made the statement you couldn't survive without state standards, or maybe survive wasn't the right word, but you expressed the importance of state standards. And I guess a question for you philosophically is, why look to Tallahassee for those standards as somebody who, you're superintendent, you're in charge, right?
Yeah, when we say why look to Tallahassee, I think it's a good point. I think what we're looking towards is the educational community to establish standards over 67 school districts, so we're not all over the board.
Right.
So even though sometimes we point to establishments or locations, whether they be Tallahassee or Washington, D.C., really it's a statewide conversation about establishing mathematics standards. We're bringing some of the greatest minds in mathematics together. They would not be me, but would be bringing the greatest minds in English language arts, in science and music, and we're establishing a standard so that our students are competitive. Our students are able to get into some of the most prestigious universities in this country and in this world, and also go directly, as mentioned before, into the workforce or into technical schools and so forth. So standards are important, and I would rather do those and create those standards and test those standards. I was as mentioned down at the other end, where we're talking about how are those standards assuring that our students are going to be competitive. As superintendent, there's nothing more that I worry about than the competitiveness of our graduates to be able to compete, not only in the state of Florida, not only in this nation, but really internationally, compete globally for jobs and places in some form of post-secondary education. So I think the exercise, I think the standards is a healthy thing. I just think they need to be standards that are centered around educational discussions. And unfortunately, and I'm not saying this to create conflict, but unfortunately those standards have become so political that they've lost the flavor of truly being educational standards. I've never seen it in our history where they become so political.
Well, I think some would suggest, as you said, standards are perfectly appropriate, right? If I want to learn to be a woodworker, then I need to find out what the standards are for professional woodworking and compare myself against other woodworkers. The issue, I think, that drives a lot of the conversation currently is mandates.
Right.
Right? Standards, I think we can all embrace standards as how are we ensuring we're achieving the best on behalf of our students. It's when the mandates come in, and then where are they coming in from, Tallahassee or Washington? How's that affecting your ability as a local superintendent to make decisions in your community? Are questions that I have often heard. The second question, and I'm surprised it actually took us to the second question to get here, but Common Core. So the question is, expresses concern about Common Core standards, and this is similar to what we were talking about. How has it affected students in our community, and has it helped them to actually learn?
Go ahead. So
I think this is one you're going to have a lot of state perspectives.
Sure.
Let's go for it. We'll start with Senator Legg.
Sure, if you'd like, thank you. I'll start. What I've seen with the definition of Common Core is what is defined by Common Core, meaning is it involving, and I'll phrase it out in this regards because Common Core means different things to different people. For some individuals, Common Core means is the increase in standards. Some individuals, Common Core means the increase in use of technology. For some, Common Core means the increase in use of assessments. And if you look in Florida's particular issue, if you use Common Core as the definition of standards, I would say it almost has no effect in Florida, because Florida's standards, where we were at par with the so-called Common Core standards, the new Florida standards assessments were almost equal to where Florida was. When it comes to technology, however, Florida and the assessment area, Florida has has had a robust assessment system, but now it has evolved. It has evolved now to a point where our schools are being challenged to put them more on a digital platform versus a paper and pencil platform. And that evolution is a challenge. That evolution is a challenge. And the reason why it's a challenge is because the computer literacy of students varies. The technology availability of schools varies. And the question then becomes, do we want to go that direction or not go that direction? And I've found it hard-pressed to find educators that say, we want to not go to a digital platform of assessments at some level. Now, it may not be at all levels, but at some levels. So that evolution has been a challenge. Overall, however, it's been I think, a good thing to have this debate in Florida. It's been a very good
Why is that?
It's focused the attention that our students are no longer in isolation, and they are no longer just competing with Pinellas with Hillsborough with Pasco, or Florida with Georgia, or with Texas, or Maine. We are now competing now with other countries. And we have to now look at that and say, are we prepared? And just asking that fundamental question to ourselves, are our students prepared for an economy that's information-based? Causes us to look really hard in that mirror. And sometimes we like what we see in certain areas, and then sometimes we realize that we come up a little bit short and we need to improve. And so I think it's been a good discussion.
Ms. Salazar, your experience with other states?
Developing new standards is not something that's new. Connecticut was the first state in the 80s to develop statewide standards. We had the conversations with other presidential administrations back in the late 80s. So the concept of standards is not new. It's just been reinvigorated. If nothing else, Common Core drove the conversation across the country for states to revise their standards. And for states like Florida and Massachusetts and others, if your standards were already at a level that were rigorous, that you felt served your students well, you didn't see a lot of modification. But not all states were in that situation. A lot of states had to significantly overhaul their standards, their professional development, and everything that went along with those. The issue with the standards, I liken it to a recipe. Someone passes along a really great recipe, but eventually you make it your own. You might add some extra sugar, you might replace the sugar with the applesauce, you might go easy and get a cake box mix and add an egg and a few of the things to it. That's what standards are like. States take the core basis of those standards. They have the flexibility to add to them, to make them their own, to expand into other content areas, and that's the beauty of states' policy in developing their own standards. There isn't a set curriculum that goes along with Common Core. I think that's a misnomer. The curriculum.
That was my next question. How has it influenced curriculum?
What we're seeing is that states are looking at how can they support their educators and their teacher prep programs and designing curriculum that align. Right now, you will see from textbook companies and others that they'll say that their content is aligned, but I think it's up to the professionals in the districts to really determine what is aligned and what's going to work best for their students. So that curriculum development is where a lot of states are. They've been doing it for sometimes anywhere from 1 to 3 years, and now trying to determine what those next steps are. And so the standards are the standards. There's only so many standards you can say about fractions or about algebra. There's not a lot of creativity in those standards. Where we see the divergence are in the other areas, such as social studies and science for the divergence.
And why is that more difficult in the social sciences in terms of curriculum? Because that has been an issue that has come up in states over recent years.
Well, Common Core doesn't address some of those areas, and states have local and state values that they see as a priority for their students to learn along those standards. And you see more of a divergence in there, more of a local opinion on those issues, and finding curriculum and modules that align with those local community values is really the strengths of the local districts and the local school boards to determine those.
Okay, Dr. Grego,
Well stated, and really provided us a little bit of a history of standards, and we think for many of us, we might think with the Common Core began standards, and in Florida it began in the late 1980s, early 1990s with Florida standards, Sunshine State standards, Next Generation Sunshine State standards, if you remember all of those, and the HSCT, which was the first high school competency test that provided some standard, again, in the early 90s. And so we've come a long way, and standards are not a brand new thing. They have received a considerable amount of attention with the Common Core. But again, the purpose is to ensure the rigor of the instructional program, and I would agree that then the teachers have that opportunity. It is a misnomer that there's curriculum guides, but really we've been working hard over the last few years to develop those lessons and lesson plans to address the standards and address what's happening and with those standards.
Okay. Moving to testing. How have the testing requirements, this is a question from the audience, how have the testing requirements affected curriculum in the classroom? Senator Legg, do you want to go first? Or?
Sure, and I think that we have, and there's guilt on the state's hands, district hands, everyone's hands when it comes to the over-testing. To say how it affects curriculum, the biggest way I would say it would affect curriculum is that it crowds out the ability of our teachers to effectively deliver the curriculum that they want to deliver by an overzealousness of assessments. When you have layers upon layers of requirements, and the one thing that we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years is, you will always have tests in school. I mean, the moment you get rid of tests in schools, you've gotten rid of schools. So you will always have assessments. The question is how many assessments and what are they used for and at what level? And also an understanding, and again, this is a C word I probably should just adopt, it's that collaboration of understanding at a district level, what, from the lens of the child, what are they being assessed for? I've seen cases, and no fault of their own, where a child was assessed 6 or 7 times in a 1 week period. And each one of those assessments, they did not realize that the other person was assessing them. And so what happens, you have layers of over-assessment. And the challenge that we're working on at a state level is how do we peel that back? How do we put limits to it, but still allow that flexibility that Dr. Greco needs and other educators need to still provide effective assessment, to monitor that student, to ensure they're meeting the standards. And the state has a role to ensure that those standards are still being met at some level as well.
Dr. Grego, has it pushed out arts, shop class, PE?
In some ways, it has, in some of those electives. I want to say that in Pinellas County, we value our arts and music and physical education, so we fight heavily for it. This community has passed a referendum over the last 8 years to support these things, so we have additional funding for it. That's a community decision I value and I respect and a huge supporter of it. But you're right, there's only so many hours. The time of the day for elementary, middle, and high school has not changed. And has not changed over many, many decades. So, we're continually putting more and more things into that same time period. That's the constant. I'm going to go back to the teacher evaluation piece. Probably, and it's no fault of the state's or anybody else's, but when we say, even with the race to the top, that we want to have 50% of teacher performance, student performance based on teacher evaluation, then we have to measure that. And so the recipe for that measurement is you have to provide an assessment so that you're measuring everyone really in a class. And the goal there would be to measure the achievement level of students, right, of which the teachers have, and not somebody else. But the reality of it is statewide assessments only account for maybe 30–40% of the students' population in our school district. So there comes the wave and the flood of additional tests to try to equalize that playing field, which makes, I'm going to connect the dot back to my other statement with allow the local school districts to control the teacher evaluation piece. I believe a lot of your testing, whether they're perceived as requirements or required based on the requirement of having 50% of or 30% of student performance based on teacher evaluation, you're going to have to solidify that somehow. And I think there's other and better ways of doing that than through testing.
Very good. We have time for a couple more questions. Ms. Alazar, I want you to lead with this one. How can federal and particularly state education policies better prepare students for a 21st century workforce?
I think that the policy conversation has been driven by workforce needs, and we talked earlier about what is the need for standards and the global, see where we are on a global level, national level, and we have a transient population. We have students who shift from states, from institutions. We have military students who are in and out of schools all across this world. And the policy conversation is driving us to have the conversation of what do we need in our country right now? What types of jobs and economy and do we need a citizenry prepared for? And often we don't know what that's going to be in 10 to 15 years. We don't even know what it's going to be in 5 years. But the policy discussion is forcing the conversation between business and higher ed and K-12 to have an aligned system to prepare those students for what they need. You've heard of examples where you can get a certificate in middle school. You've heard of examples where we're starting to reinvent that 12th grade year, looking at it differently so that a student graduates with an associate degree or a career certificate or maybe perhaps does some level of college work. It's rethinking our education system so that it can serve the needs of your community and your state and our country. And policy drives that conversation and gives food for thought for other people to consider where's their system and where does it need to be.
So 21st century workforce is interesting because we're talking about a 21st century economy, but one of the questions that comes up locally as well, and this is very related to this question, is the fact that, and I think somebody said everybody will receive some type of higher education. It may be a trade though. The notion of vocational school for those who may not choose to go on to higher education. So when I was educated, I went to Pasco Comprehensive High School, and at that time you could choose to spend your afternoon, I believe it was 3 periods, in cosmetology, in auto mechanics, in engineering, and the idea was creating a workforce. Is that now completely passé? Is that coming back? How are we investing in those students who perhaps decide not to come to St. Petersburg College or attend higher education?
We have, in Pinellas County, I can speak for, and I hope it never leaves us, but our board is renamed and we're re-engineering our technical schools to technical colleges in partnership with this St. Pete College, because there's a place for that. There's a place for auto mechanics, there's a place for HVAC mechanics, there's a place for diesel engine repairs, marine engine repairs, truck drivers, and our Pinellas Technical Colleges. We have 3 campuses. They're flourishing. We have adults earning their high school diploma at the same time that they're earning industry certifications and job preparatory training. Everyone there has a notion of not a notion, but a requirement of getting a job. It was said before, Congressman Jolly, I believe you said it, that all education is vocational. And some might be a technical college and then an employment, but no one wants 4 years of university and unemployment either. So the reality of it is that we may look at it slightly different, but all education needs to end up with gainful employment and satisfaction of life and so on. But it might just be a year, it might be 8-10 months, and what a value. I mean, if you think about minimum wage as compared to $15-18 an hour with 8 or 10 months of educational services in a technical college, for a return on an investment from an economic point of view, that's a great deal. And then those students, if you take the run of the ladders with healthcare, they become a CNA, then they become an LPN, then they become an RN, and all of a sudden you have this economic developer through education where people are going into education, they're coming out and back to work and going in and back to work. And this is the new educational economy. You and I may have gone into education, finished, and never gone back. Now they're going in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. And each step along the way is an advancement and also a benefit to the community because they're obtaining higher paid salary, higher paid jobs, the skill levels going up, and this is helping the entire community.
Right. And I know we have folks from industry in the room today. That is a constant among industry, is workforce development in Canada. Senator Legg, do you have a state perspective?
Sure, and that's been one of the highest priorities of our educational system, I would say the last 3 years. And we call it, in Florida, we call it CAPE, Career and Professional Education. And we've really shifted our funding formula to incentivize both at a college, community college level or state college level and at a school district level for them to incentivize that to do it, and also looked at our high school graduation curriculum and standards to allow for those CAPE certifications to count for certain graduation requirements. Because if you have a nursing, and I am not an expert in the industry certification areas, but if you have an industry certification in a medical field and the standards align with biology, why make you take a biology course all over again to keep that industry certification and allow it to substitute? But the one thing that I would say, and we talk about this quite a bit in talking with students, it's not your daddy's VOTEC. It's not the days of, oh, I'm going to go in, I'm not good in school, so I'm going to go to a VOTEC school. The work there is rigorous. It is very rigorous. You need the fundamental, and I go back to my first C, you need the content skills to go there. It's just applied content. It's applied in a different way. And that is a re-education of our community of saying, well, they don't need to go to high school, we're going to go to a VOTEC school. Well, that VOTEC school is going to have rigorous standards that are involved, because auto mechanic really is computer science now. Auto mechanic, diesel mechanic is computer skills. And so it's an integration of those skills. And I think those states and those communities that are on the lead of that area will be on the lead of an economy and the job market.
Very good. A question from the audience specifically for Dr. Grego, and then we'll wrap up with one final question on charter schools and vouchers. Dr. Grego, this is for you. Research continually shows that educational programs that raise aspirations for underserved K-12 students is a best practice. Community-based mentoring is one of those programs. What is the county doing in regards to mentoring programs, and do you think there's a role for institutions like SPC to be a partner in such programs?
Absolutely. Wait for me at the door. We'll sign you up. We, I think, are nearing over 4,000 mentors in our district. In fact, we just finished a district-wide accreditation we were very successful at, and they were looking at our mentoring program, and they encouraged us, as the advanced ed always would come in, they'll never leave not giving you any suggestion, right? But their suggestion I really embrace, and that is create a system where no matter where a student is, they have a caring adult and they have a mentor. It might be, we don't want to leave parents out of that mix, but it might be a coach, it might be a bus driver, it might be a custodian, it might be, but we have mentors in our AVID program. I want to thank this college because St. Pete College is the primary supplier of our mentors in AVID, Advancement via Individual Determination, where these are first-time potential post-secondary education or college students, and they need mentorships. They need mentors.
And what is the role of the mentor?
The role of the mentor is to meet periodically weekly with their mentee and to encourage them, to follow them, to work with them in terms of their grades, their attendance, their behavior, all aspects of their success, family issues, other issues. We also have a state program called Take Stock in Children, where we have over 1,400 students under scholarship that we began. We just had a signing down in St. Petersburg, where we have students starting in 6th grade. They're attached to a mentor in 6th grade, and those mentors stay with that student all the way to 12th grade. And if they stay drug-free, crime-free, grades C or above, they have at the end of their trail at 12th grade, they have a prepaid college tuition that can go to our technical school, can go to St. Pete College, can go to a university. 60 hours, plus if they're successful with those 60 hours, is another 60. All of these programs, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, 5,000 role models, they all have that that common theme of mentors. It's probably the one area that I would plead this audience and many others in the public to get involved with the school. If someone asks me, how can I get involved with school? Get involved with a child, one child at a time.
How does someone get involved in the mentoring program in Pinellas County?
If you look at our website, we have a mentoring link on there. It's the easiest way for me to communicate it very quickly, and it'll be community under the community section, and we have mentor training. If you have a business or an area that have 12, 15, we'll bring the training to you. We have businesses where the CEO has said, City of St. Petersburg, Raymond James, we bring training to them because their CEOs have said, this is important to us. I want our employees out into our schools. John Hopkins, the hospitals, all children's hospitals and so forth, they're all involved with this. And so we bring training to them. Go to our website, and there's a link to the mentor along with the training, and it's Dr. Valerie Brim who heads that up. You'll see her name. Thank you.
Very good. So the last question today is for this panel is about charter schools as well as vouchers. We're going to include both of those because it all speaks to school choice, parent choice. And I will tell those of you in the audience, when we wrap up with this question, we will have a short break, but it will be the first series or the first question in our poll. And the question is going to be, do you support public funding for charter schools? We'll give instructions on how to use your smartphone to respond to that question. Well, there it is right now. Let me actually, for those of you who care to do this, my understanding, and I'll get corrected here at the end if I'm wrong, is the first time you want to participate in the poll today, you text Policy Solutions to 22333. You do that one time. And from that point on throughout the day, when we ask a polling question, all you'll need to do is hit, well, in this case, A or B for yes or no. Let's have the question, though, on charter schools and vouchers as well. Ms. Salazar, you mentioned there are still states that have not adopted charter schools or have not stood up charter schools. You have the opportunity to look across many states. Can you comment on the value of charter schools, why some states have not embraced charter schools, and perhaps the growth curve, because my understanding is we have seen a significant growth since 1991 in the number of charter schools.
Well, I think that the choice to do vouchers or charter schools is unique to each individual state and the dynamics that occur within those states. Some states ventured out very early and learned some lessons and made some modifications along the way. Other states entered in what I would call a phase two once kind of the first initial test drive had taken place. But I think it gets down to the individual values of that state and politically what is feasible in those states and the direction that those legislative leaders and governors and executive branch offices might take in that direction.
There's a embrace, though, it seems, of many. So I've yet to encounter a parent who has been disappointed in their decision to send their student to a charter school. Are there performance metrics for those students? Are there evaluations that show the satisfaction rate with charter schools compared to other schools?
States handle it differently. Many states have the same accountability measures in place for charter schools that they do for traditional public schools, but there are 2 states that don't even apply the same state standards or assessments to their charter schools. So we have a different playing field in different states. I think there are charter schools who are performing very well. There are charter schools who are not performing very well. And I think just like with any educational model, you're going to have successes and you're going to have those that struggle. And being able to have some sort of metrics and accountability in place to identify those that are doing well and those that are not doing well gets back to the fundamental basis of what educational model is going to serve students best.
Okay. Dr. Grego in Pinellas County, give us an assessment of the growth curve of charter schools, the interest of parents in school choice.
I've been here as superintendent about 2.5 years, and we have not had a very significant increase in charter school activities. They are public schools, and I was never opposed to charter schools and funding to those schools. I also have always embraced the original intent of it in the state of Florida. That was to bring something innovative or some niche that the traditional public educational system was not addressing. I worked with charter applications across the state on schools with autism and other aspects that I felt like we needed to bring partnerships together from the medical field and educational field, and they brought a uniqueness that through the legislation of charter schools we could accomplish. I also have to say to you that maybe they've gone from some memories, but certainly not mine, where we've hurt kids through charter schools, and we've damaged their educational settings because people were opening charter schools who were not qualified, should not have been opening charter schools, and quickly closed them with tax dollars. So there are two sides, as mentioned. I may be a little bit more blunt.
Was that early in the charter school evolution, if you will, or is that an ongoing issue?
It's an ongoing issue. Perhaps more frequently early, but it's still an ongoing issue. And I respect the state leadership of trying to establish a greater amount of standards, which still trying to keep and hold the concept of charters. But I really would emphasize the need to, if we're going to continue down this path, to really specialize in an area that perhaps where there's a need, as mentioned, to really drive the need of the student and the community. So, and become more of a partner rather than an adversarial type of role across this nation. It doesn't need to be that way. I don't support that. But it needs to be one of high quality. If a charter school is going to exist in Pinellas County, it needs to be high quality, or I will work to protect the educational rights of students.
Sure. Very good. Senator Legg, from your perspective.
You know, it's been very good for the state, because if you look at, and as Dr. Greger said, the initial wave of charter schools was to offer something new and different for public choice. And you have significant success stories and you have significant failure stories. The one thing I will say, the positive thing about charter schools is those failed stories, they do get shut down, but we have to do more at a state level to ensure that they don't open up to begin with, but we also don't create artificial barriers for those high quality schools to open up that want to. But the one benefit that has not been said already is, you know, this is maybe a little controversial, is it does create a backwind pressure on the established school districts to be innovative. Because if they're not innovative, a charter school will come and provide that innovation for them. And while there is a spirit of collaboration, there is a spirit of competition, and that's a healthy competition. If you look at the career academies that have swept our state over the years, they have been a very good thing for our state, and they are public, in our public schools, traditional public schools. Even in our own community, we have aeronautic academies, culinary academies, mechanical academies. What has caused that pressure to occur is because if they didn't open up, a charter may have opened up in their place, because that is what the community was demanding. So it has forced the traditional system, which to no fault of their own, but they are government institutions, and as a conservative, government moves slowly. It's bureaucratic in nature. It's hard to respond to the needs of the parents and the communities, whereas charters are more nimble and they can open up and provide that release valve. I've seen in our own communities where the school districts, not Pinellas, have not been creative, and now all of a sudden have realized we have to be creative or we will have students going to other schools. And so that has been good for the schools. And again, I go back to my early years of a young child. It's keeping the main thing, which is what's best for the student.
Very good. Well put. This concludes the panel now. I will point out again the texting to answer our poll question. I am confident this will be one of the most unscientific polls that we ever conduct. Well, actually, wow. Okay, we're already there. We will leave that open for anybody who has questions about polling. This is a good time. If you haven't figured it out during a break, perhaps ask somebody. We'll leave it open for a while. It is about 10:16, 10:17. We're going to reconvene at 10:30, very promptly at 10:30 for our federal budget conversation. But let me say a thank you and ask everybody to say thank you to our panelists this morning. Thank you very much.